My name is Campbell. I am 28 years old, and I worked 3 jobs through college to buy my first house. After years of sacrifice, while my entitled sister Megan was pampered by our parents, I finally achieved independence. During a family dinner, Megan smirked and announced she was moving into my house because our parents decided so. I calmly revealed I had sold the house, sliding papers across the table as their faces turned white. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if family drama gets you fired up. Growing up in the Henderson family in suburban Connecticut was like living in 2 different households under the same roof. From my earliest memories, there was always an invisible line drawn between how my parents treated me and how they treated my younger sister Megan. We were not poor by any means. My father, Robert, worked as a regional manager at a pharmaceutical company, and my mother, Diana, ran a moderately successful interior design business from home. We lived in a spacious 4-bedroom colonial in a neighborhood with good schools and manicured lawns. From the outside, we were the picture of upper-middle-class success. But inside those walls, the difference in treatment was as clear as day and night. When I brought home straight, as in middle school, my mother would nod and say, "That is what we expect from you, Campbell." When Megan brought home B's and C's, there would be celebrations, ice cream trips, and effusive praise about how hard she must have studied. This pattern repeated itself through every milestone of our childhood. When I made the varsity baseball team as a freshman, my father said, "Do not get too distracted from your studies." When Megan made junior varsity cheerleading, my parents attended every competition, created elaborate signs, and threw parties afterward. My early interest in finance emerged around age 13. I would read the business section of the newspaper that my father discarded each morning, fascinated by the stock market reports and real estate transactions. When I asked for investment books for Christmas, my parents exchanged concerned looks. "Would not you rather have video games like normal teenagers?" my father asked. Meanwhile, Megan cycled through expensive hobbies, horseback riding, pottery, guitar lessons, abandoning each after a few months, with my parents cheerfully funding the next interest. By high school, I had accepted my place in the family hierarchy. I stopped seeking approval and instead focused on independence. While Megan partied her way through high school with a rotating cast of friends, I maintained solid grades, worked part-time at a local hardware store, and saved every dollar I could. My parents seemed more concerned about my lack of social life than proud of my work ethic. When college acceptance letters arrived, I received a partial scholarship to State University's business program. My parents' response was tepid. "We hoped you would aim for something more prestigious." A year later, when Megan got accepted to the same university with no scholarship, my parents beamed with pride. "She will have the full college experience without being distracted by work." This was when I made the decision that would define my adult life. I would pay my own way through college. The partial scholarship covered about 40% of my tuition, but I refused to take a dime from my parents or burden myself with excessive student loans. This meant working a lot. My schedule during those 4 years was brutal. I woke up at 5 in the morning to work the opening shift at a coffee shop near campus until 9, attended classes until 2 in the afternoon, worked at the university library until 7 in the evening, then waited tables at a local restaurant until midnight. Weekends meant double shifts at the restaurant. Sleep was a luxury I could rarely afford. It was during my sophomore year, while serving tables, that I met Alice. She was a nursing student with a similarly packed schedule, classes by day, hospital volunteer work by evening. We bonded over our mutual exhaustion and determination. Alice understood my drive in a way my family never did. She became my strongest supporter, never complaining when I had to cancel plans because of work or study commitments. "You are building something," she would say. "Most people our age are just drifting." My first real exposure to real estate came during junior year, when a regular customer at the coffee shop mentioned he needed help managing several rental properties. The pay was modest, but the education was invaluable. I learned about tenant screening, property maintenance, and most importantly, how real estate could build wealth over time. This knowledge lit a fire in me that has never dimmed. The stark contrast between my life and Megan's continued through college. While I juggled 3 jobs and a full course load, Megan changed majors 3 times, maintained a spotty academic record, and relied entirely on our parents for support. When her car broke down during her sophomore year, our parents immediately purchased her a new Honda Civic. Meanwhile, I was waking up 30 minutes earlier to catch the bus across town for my morning shift. That car was the breaking point for me. I remember calling home from the coffee shop's back room during my break, my hands still smelling of espresso beans. "So Megan got a new car?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "She needs reliable transportation, Campbell," my mother explained, as if I was being unreasonable for bringing it up. "And I do not. I am working 3 jobs and taking a full course load." My father took the phone. "Campbell, we are not having this conversation. When you are a parent, you will understand that different children have different needs." Different needs. That phrase echoed in my head for days afterward. It was their way of justifying the unfair treatment without admitting the simple truth: they favored Megan. That night, as I walked to the bus stop after my restaurant shift, exhausted and smelling of fried food, I made a promise to myself. I would never again expect anything from my parents, and I would build my own success so completely that their approval would become irrelevant. I graduated from college with a bachelor's degree in business administration, a modest 3.6 GPA, and less than $10,000 in student loan debt, a miracle considering the cost of education. Most importantly, I had 4 years of practical work experience, while many of my classmates had none. This advantage helped me land an entry-level position at Meridian Financial Services, a mid-sized firm specializing in wealth management. The starting salary was nothing spectacular, but it offered stability and benefits I had never enjoyed before. For the first time in years, I did not need to work multiple jobs just to stay afloat. During my orientation week at Meridian, I met Marcus Turner, another new hire who shared my interest in real estate investing. Unlike me, Marcus came from a family of real estate professionals and had absorbed knowledge about the market since childhood. We quickly became friends, spending lunch breaks discussing investment strategies and market trends. "Most people our age are spending everything they earn," Marcus observed during one of our conversations. "If we live below our means now and invest the difference, we will be miles ahead in 10 years. I took this philosophy to heart. While many of my coworkers upgraded their lifestyles with their first professional paychecks, new cars, downtown apartments, weekend trips, I maintained my college frugality. I found the cheapest acceptable apartment I could, sharing with 2 roommates to minimize costs. I brought lunch from home every day, kept my ancient flip phone long after it became an office joke, and continued to take public transportation. Every spare dollar went into my house fund. I set up an automatic transfer that moved 25% of each paycheck into a separate savings account before I could be tempted to spend it. I took advantage of my company's 401 Kelvin match, but kept my other investments liquid, knowing I would need a sizable down payment sooner rather than later. This period of extreme saving lasted 3 years. I missed countless happy hours, turned down weekend getaways, and wore the same 5 work outfits in rotation. My parents thought I was being needlessly ascetic. Megan openly mocked my lifestyle whenever I came home for holidays. "You are making decent money now," my mother would say. "Why live like you are still a struggling student?" What they did not understand was that every sacrifice was bringing me closer to my goal. I was not depriving myself. I was investing in my future. Alice understood. By this point, she had completed her nursing degree and was working at the university hospital. Our relationship had deepened, weathering the challenges of our demanding schedules and limited resources. On weekends, instead of expensive dates, we would visit open houses in neighborhoods we liked, imagining our future. Someday, I would tell her as we wandered through homes we could not yet afford, we will have a place of our own. By the end of my 3rd year at Meridian, my dedication at work had earned me a promotion to junior financial advisor, bringing a welcome salary increase. More importantly, my house fund had grown to nearly $60,000, enough for a down payment in certain neighborhoods. I began working with Stephanie Winters, a real estate agent Marcus recommended. Unlike the flashy agents who dominated local billboards, Stephanie specialized in finding value where others missed it. Properties with good bones in transitional neighborhoods, fixer-uppers with solid structural elements, foreclosures that just needed some care. Most first-time buyers want everything move-in ready, she explained during our initial meeting. If you are willing to put in some work, you can build equity much faster. After viewing dozens of properties over several months, I founded a 1950s ranch-style home in an older neighborhood that was beginning to attract younger residents. The previous owner had passed away, and his children were eager to sell. The house needed significant cosmetic updates, but the inspection revealed solid construction, a new roof, and updated electrical systems. The asking price was $240,000 at the lower end of the market for the area due to the dated interior. I offered $220,000, and after some negotiation, we settled at $230,000. With my $60,000 down payment, I secured a mortgage with manageable monthly payments only slightly higher than what I had been paying in rent. The day I received the keys was one of the most significant moments of my life. I stood alone in the empty living room of my new home, sunlight streaming through dusty windows, and felt a sense of accomplishment that no academic achievement had ever provided. This was tangible, real, something I had created through years of focused effort. That evening, I invited Alice, Marcus, and a few close friends from work to see the house. We sat on the floor of the empty living room eating pizza and drinking cheap champagne from plastic cups. There was no furniture yet, just possibility and potential. To Campbell, Marcus toasted, raising his cup, the first of us to make the leap. I was bursting to share my achievement with my family despite our complicated relationship. That weekend, I invited my parents and Megan to see the house, hoping that perhaps this concrete achievement would finally earn their genuine approval. They arrived an hour late. My father circled the living room with a critical eye, pointing out the outdated kitchen cabinets and worn carpet. My mother made polite but strained comments about the potential of the space and the tone she reserved for clients with limited budgets. Megan wandered through the rooms, smirking at the harvest gold bathroom fixtures. "It is certainly a starter home," my mother said. Emphasis on starter, as if to remind me this was not a real achievement. "In this neighborhood, the area is up and coming," I explained. "Property values have increased 15% in the last 2 years. My father shrugged. "Well, everyone has to start somewhere. Megan is looking at apartments downtown, much more convenient location." I did not bother mentioning that Megan's downtown apartment search was being funded entirely by them while I had saved for years to afford my starter home. The comparison was implied, as it always had been. They stayed less than 30 minutes before making excuses about another engagement. As their car pulled away, I felt the familiar mix of disappointment and anger I had known all my life. But this time something was different. Standing on the front porch of my own home, purchased with my own money, I realized their approval had lost its power over me. A week later, I hosted a proper housewarming party with friends who genuinely celebrated my success. Alice helped me arrange the second-hand furniture I had purchased. Marcus brought tools and offered to help with upcoming renovation projects. My supervisor from work, Trevor Blackwell, brought an expensive bottle of scotch as a housewarming gift and spent the evening talking about the local real estate market. "You have made a smart move," Trevor told me, gesturing with his glass toward the backyard. "Building equity young is how wealth starts." As my friends filled the house with laughter and genuine support, I realized I had created something my parents had never given me. A circle of people who valued me for exactly who I was, not for who they wished I would be. With the keys to my own home jingling in my pocket, I embarked on what would become a 2-year renovation journey. Every weekend became a workshop in home improvement. I started with the most urgent updates, ripping out the stained carpeting to reveal hardwood floors underneath that just needed refinishing, replacing the ancient water heater and fixing the leaky kitchen faucet. YouTube became my personal renovation university. I spent lunch breaks watching videos on tile installation, drywall repair, and basic plumbing. Local hardware stores offered weekend workshops on home maintenance that I attended religiously. What I could not learn to do myself, I bartered for helping a coworker with his taxes in exchange for his expertise in refinishing the hardwood floors. Marcus proved invaluable during this process. Having grown up helping his father with rental property maintenance, he knew his way around power tools and was generous with his time. We established a routine Saturday mornings at the home improvement store, followed by a full day of renovation work, ending with takeout food and cold beers amid the dust and progress. "You are building sweat equity," Marcus would say, as we admired a newly painted room or successfully installed backsplash. "Every hour you put in is adding value." My professional life was advancing in parallel with my home improvements. At Meridian Financial, Trevor had taken notice of my work ethic and financial acumen. 18 months after purchasing my home, I was promoted to financial advisor with my own small client portfolio, bringing another welcome bump in income that I immediately channeled into higher quality renovation materials. Alice had become a constant presence in my life and my home. Though we maintained separate residences, her apartment was closer to the hospital where she worked. She spent most weekends helping with renovations. She had an eye for design that complemented my practical approach, suggesting paint colors and fixtures that transformed the dated spaces into something fresh and inviting. As the house evolved from a fixer-upper to a comfortable home, the contrast between my life and my family's expectations grew increasingly stark. This tension came to a head about 2 years after I purchased the house, when my parents and Megan showed up unannounced one Saturday afternoon. I was in the backyard building a deck with Marcus and Alice when I heard the doorbell. Still wearing sawdust-covered clothes and work gloves, I opened the front door to find my family standing there dressed as if for a restaurant brunch. Megan had brought her new boyfriend Kevin, a slick-looking guy wearing designer sunglasses, and a watch that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Campbell. We were in the area and thought we would stop by to see how the house is coming along, my mother announced, already stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The next hour was excruciating. My mother critiqued the paint colors Alice and I had carefully selected. Bold choice for such a small space. She commented about the navy blue accent wall in the dining room. My father examined the deck in progress with visible skepticism, asking pointed questions about whether I had obtained the proper permits. Megan and Kevin wandered through the house, whispering to each other and occasionally chuckling. As we all stood awkwardly in the kitchen, the one room I had completely renovated with new cabinets, countertops, and appliances, I overheard Megan speaking to Kevin in what she thought was a quiet voice. "Do not worry about how basic everything is here," she said. "My parents will help us get a much nicer place once we decide where we want to live." Kevin nodded, adjusting his expensive watch. "Good. I was thinking at least 3,000 square feet, maybe in Riverside or Oakwood." I pretended not to hear, but Alice's hand found mine under the counter and squeezed it supportively. Marcus, sensing the tension, made an excuse about needing more deck screws and departed with a sympathetic glance in my direction. Before leaving, my father pulled me aside in the hallway. "Your mother and I have been thinking," he began in the tone that always preceded an unwelcome suggestion. "Megan is struggling to find a suitable apartment on her entry-level salary. Since you have all this space now, perhaps you could consider letting her stay in your spare bedroom for a few months, just until she gets established." The request was so presumptuous that I momentarily struggled to respond. Megan had graduated over a year ago with a communications degree and had been working as a social media coordinator for a local boutique when she bothered to show up. The idea of her moving into the home I had sacrificed years to obtain while she continued to receive parental subsidies was absurd. "Dad, that would not work for a variety of reasons," I finally replied. "I am still renovating for one thing, and Megan and I have very different lifestyles." He frowned, clearly displeased with my answer. "Family helps family, Campbell. Your sister needs support right now." "I have supported myself since I was 18, I pointed out. "Maybe it is time Megan learned to do the same." The conversation ended there, but the request had planted a seed of unease. For the first time, I began to wonder if my parents might expect me to become Megan's safety net once their resources were exhausted. This suspicion was reinforced at Thanksgiving dinner, a few months later. Gathered around my parents' formal dining table, my mother clinked her glass to make an announcement. "Megan has some exciting news to share," she beamed. Megan straightened in her chair, tossing her hair back dramatically. "I have decided to quit my job at Everly Boutique," she announced. The environment was stifling my creativity. "I am going to take some time to find myself and explore opportunities more aligned with my personal brand." My parents nodded approvingly, as if quitting a stable job without another lined up was a sign of courage rather than irresponsibility. When I suggested that perhaps lining up another position First might be wise, the response was immediate and unified. Not everyone wants to be chained to a desk pushing papers, Campbell Megan snapped. Your sister needs to find her passion, my mother added defensively. We are supporting her decision, my father concluded firmly. Sometimes you need to take risks to find your path. I bit my tongue, remembering all the risks I had taken without their emotional or financial backing. Later that evening, as my father and I were alone in the kitchen, he casually mentioned that with Megan unemployed, they might need to tighten their belts. Your mother and I are not getting any younger, he said, loading dishes into the dishwasher. We had hoped to increase our retirement contributions this year, but with helping Megan that might not be possible. The implication hung in the air. I was doing well financially, so perhaps I should be contributing to the family pool. I deliberately changed the subject, but the conversation left me deeply unsettled. It was my Uncle Jim, my father's brother, who provided unexpected perspective during that same Thanksgiving visit. As we stepped outside for some air after dinner, he nodded toward my recently purchased certified pre-owned sedan in the driveway. Nice practical car, he commented. You have always had a good head on your shoulders, Campbell. Thanks, Uncle Jim. Sometimes I think my parents would prefer if I made flashier choices. He chuckled without humor. Robert and Diana have always had a blind spot when it comes to Megan. Been that way since she was born. We stood in silence for a moment before he added, I respect what you have built on your own. Not many young people would have your discipline. It was the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged my independence as a strength rather than a quirk or deficiency. That brief conversation with Uncle Jim provided validation I had not realized I still craved. Around this time, Marcus and I began discussing the possibility of a formal business partnership. What had started as casual conversations about real estate investing had evolved into a concrete plan. We had both been saving aggressively and had complementary skills, my financial analysis abilities, paired with his practical knowledge of property management and renovation. We could start small, Marcus suggested during one of our weekend renovation sessions. Find a distressed property, fix it up, either rent it for cash flow or flip it for a quick profit. The idea was exciting, but I was cautious. Let me finish getting this place where I want it first, I told him. Then I will be ready to take on another project. Little did I know that external factors would soon accelerate these plans in ways I could never have anticipated. The catalyst for the next chapter of my life arrived unexpectedly during a quarterly performance review at work. Trevor had always been supportive of my career, but on this particular afternoon he closed his office door and spoke with unusual directness. Campbell, I have been watching your work with our clients, particularly your interest in real estate portfolios, he began. There is something happening in the market that might interest you personally. He explained that Westfield Development, a major commercial real estate company, had secured approval for a mixed-use project that would transform several blocks near my neighborhood. They were quietly acquiring residential properties in the area at premium prices well above market value. They are keeping it low profile to avoid speculation, Trevor explained, sliding a brochure across his desk. But as someone who lives in the target area, you should know your property might be worth substantially more than you realize. That evening, I called Marcus from my car in the office parking garage, too excited to wait until I got home. We agreed to meet at my house immediately. When he arrived, we spread the development plans across my dining room table and began analyzing the potential impact. They are planning retail on the ground floor, luxury apartments above, and a boutique hotel on the corner lot, Marcus noted, tracing the schematics with his finger. Your house sits right in the acquisition zone. We spent hours researching Westfield's previous projects, confirming their legitimacy and financial backing. This was no speculative venture. The company had a 20-year track record of successful developments and was backed by a consortium of institutional investors. If they are offering above-market prices, you could be looking at a substantial windfall, Marcus concluded. But you need to be strategic about this. The potential opportunity was exhilarating, but it presented an ethical dilemma. I had poured my heart and soul into renovating this house. Each room represented countless weekends of work, problem-solving, and small victories. It had become more than just a property. It was the physical manifestation of my independence. That night after Marcus left, I sat on my back deck with Alice sharing a bottle of wine as I explained the situation. What do you think I asked after laying out all the details? Am I crazy to even consider selling after all the work we have put in? Alice considered the question thoughtfully, swirling the wine in her glass. This house represented a specific goal at a specific time in your life, she finally said. You wanted to prove you could do it on your own, and you did. But maybe your goals have evolved. What do you mean? The house itself is not the achievement, Campbell. The achievement is what you built. Your financial independence, your skills, your confidence. Those go with you wherever you live. Her perspective helped clarify my thinking. We stayed up late discussing possibilities, investing the proceeds in multiple rental properties, accelerating the business partnership with Marcus, maybe even purchasing a larger home where we could build our future together. By morning, I had made my decision. I would quietly explore the possibility of selling to Westfield, but I would keep the process completely confidential. Given my family's increasing hints about financial support and Megan's unstable situation, I worried they might try to insert themselves into any windfall I received. I contacted Stephanie, the real estate agent, who had helped me purchase the house, swearing her to secrecy about my intentions. She reached out discreetly to Westfield's acquisition team, presenting my property as a potential acquisition without naming me as the owner. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Within a week, Stephanie called with news that made my heart race. Westfield was prepared to offer $740,000 for my property, more than 3 times what I had paid just 3 years earlier. They want to move quickly, Stephanie advised. Their project timeline is accelerating, and your property is in a key location for their plans. After consulting with a real estate attorney to review the offer and terms I accepted, the due diligence period was brief, as Westfield had already done environmental and structural assessments of the entire neighborhood. We set a closing date for 30 days later, with a significant earnest money deposit that demonstrated their commitment. During this period, I met with a financial advisor not affiliated with my workplace to avoid any conflicts of interest, to develop a strategy for the proceeds. We created a diversified plan that would allow me to 1. Purchase a new primary residence in a more established neighborhood. 2. Invest in 2 rental properties with Marcus as business partners. 3. Establish a long-term investment portfolio for future growth. 4. Set aside a portion for capital reserves and emergencies. One evening, as Alice and I were discussing how to furnish our potential new home, our conversation naturally turned toward our future together. Sitting on the back deck where we had spent so many evenings, I realized there was no reason to wait any longer. Alice, I said, taking her hand, these past 4 years with you have been the happiest of my life. You supported me when I was working 3 jobs in college. You spent countless weekends helping me renovate this house. You understood my goals when even my own family did not. Would you marry me? Her joyful acceptance cemented the feeling that I was making the right decision. This house had been the first step in building my independent life, but it was time to create something bigger, a partnership, a future, a family of our own making. As the closing date approached, I maintained absolute secrecy about the sale. At work, I mentioned to a few colleagues that I was considering moving to be closer to Alice's hospital, but gave no specifics. To my family, I said nothing at all, despite increasingly frequent calls from my parents. Through Uncle Jim, I learned that my parents had been supporting Megan even more extensively than I had realized. They had paid the security deposit and first 3 months' rent on her previous apartment, covered her car insurance and phone bill, and regularly loaned her money for basic expenses that never seemed to be repaid. They refinanced their house last year, Uncle Jim confided during one of our occasional lunches. I do not think their retirement accounts are where they should be at their age. This information reinforced my decision to keep the house sale private. If my parents were already compromising their retirement to support Megan's lifestyle, they might see my windfall as a solution to their financial strain. The closing occurred without a hitch. On a Thursday afternoon, I signed the final paperwork and received confirmation of the wire transfer, $740,000, minus the remaining mortgage balance and closing costs, deposited directly into my newly established investment account. That evening, as I walked through the empty house one last time, I felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in what I had accomplished, gratitude for the opportunities it had provided, and excitement for the future. I had 30 days to vacate the property, having negotiated a rent-back agreement to give myself time to find a new home. The next morning, I received a text message from my mother, 2A, family dinner this Saturday, at Rossini's at 7. Important matters to discuss. Attendance mandatory. The formal tone and choice of venue, an expensive Italian restaurant my parents reserved for special occasions, raised immediate suspicions. I confirmed my attendance, adding that I would be bringing Alice. Just family for this dinner, my mother replied immediately. Alice is family. I responded, a small act of rebellion that signaled the shifting power dynamics that were about to unfold. Rossini's Italian Ristorante occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian mansion in the historic district. With its white tablecloths, soft lighting, and prices that made me wince despite my recent windfall, it was my parents' venue of choice for celebrations and important announcements. As Alice and I walked through the ornate entrance, I felt a familiar tension in my shoulders, the physical manifestation of family dynamics that had shaped my entire life. My parents and Megan were already seated at a round table near the back of the restaurant. My mother's pinched expression when she saw Alice confirmed that her presence was still unwelcome despite my insistence. My father stood briefly, offering a perfunctory handshake and nod. Campbell, Alice, he acknowledged before returning to his seat. Megan did not bother to look up from her phone, her recently highlighted hair falling forward to obscure her face. There was no sign of Kevin yet, though an empty chair suggested he was expected. You are looking well, my mother offered, as Alice and I took our seats. The observation seemed genuine, if reluctant. That new promotion must be agreeing with you. Small talk limped along while we ordered drinks and appetizers. My father inquired about my work at Meridian with his usual detachment. My mother asked Alice about her nursing position, though her questions revealed she had retained almost nothing from our previous conversations about Alice's career. Megan finally engaged when the topic turned to her latest job search. I had an interview at Luminous Media last week. She announced naming a boutique marketing agency known for its selective hiring and trendy downtown office. It went really well, but I am not sure the compensation package meets my requirements. My father nodded approvingly. No need to settle. The right opportunity will recognize your value. I bit back a comment about the value of actually having an income while searching for the right opportunity. Megan had been unemployed for nearly 4 months at this point, her longest stretch yet. Kevin arrived 20 minutes late, sliding into his seat without an apology for his tardiness. Despite being chronically unemployed, he somehow managed to dress exclusively in designer clothes today. Sporting a blazer I recognized from a recent magazine spread as costing well over $1,000. Traffic was insane, he muttered immediately, reaching for the wine bottle and pouring himself a generous glass. The server arrived to take our dinner orders, providing a brief respite from the strained conversation. As soon as he departed, however, my father cleared his throat in the way he always did before making an announcement. We have asked you here tonight because there are some family matters to discuss, he began, his tone formal as if addressing a board meeting rather than his son. My mother picked up the thread. As you know, Megan has been going through a transitional period career-wise. The job market in her field is extremely competitive, and the cost of living in this area is ridiculous. Megan interjected. The rent for anything decent is completely unaffordable on an entry-level salary. I nodded non-committally, already sensing where this conversation was heading, but curious to see how they would frame it. Kevin and Megan have been looking for a place that would give them enough space without breaking the bank, my mother continued. Something in a decent neighborhood, with room for Megan to set up her home office for freelance projects. My father jumped in his tone, suggesting he was presenting a solution that would benefit everyone. We have been thinking about this situation from all angles, and we have come up with an arrangement that makes sense for the whole family. Megan chose this moment to deliver the line she had clearly been rehearsing. Looking directly at me for the first time that evening, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth, she announced, Mom and Dad said I am moving into your house. The statement hung in the air for a moment. Alice's hand found mine under the table as I processed not just the words but the entitled certainty with which they were delivered. Your house has 3 bedrooms, my mother explained, as if I might have forgotten my own floor plan. You are single and have a good job, you do not need all that space. It makes sense for Megan and Kevin to use it while they get established. We would take good care of the place, Kevin added magnanimously, as if he were doing me a favor. I have already started planning how to convert your home office into my yoga and meditation studio. Megan continued scrolling through her phone to show me a Pinterest board labeled Zen Space Transformation. My father leaned forward, moving in for what he clearly considered the close of a successfully negotiated deal. You can move back home with us temporarily. It would give your mother and me a chance to see more of you, and you could save on expenses for a while. The absurdity of the situation might have been comical, if it were not so infuriating. They had planned this entire scenario without once considering that I might object to being displaced from my own home to accommodate Megan's unwillingness to support herself. I looked around the table at their expectant faces and made a split-second decision. I had planned to tell them about the house sale eventually, but not like this, not as a reaction to their presumptuous demands. Yet the moment called for unvarnished truth. That is an interesting suggestion, I said, keeping my voice calm and even. But there is one significant problem with your plan. What is that? My mother asked, her tone suggesting that any obstacle I might raise would be easily overcome. I do not own the house anymore. A beat of silence, then nervous laughter from my father. Of course you own the house. We helped you move furniture in last year. I sold it, I stated simply. The closing was last Thursday. My mother's face froze in an expression of disbelief. That is not possible. You would have told us if you were selling your house. Rather than argue further, I reached into my jacket pocket and removed the closing documents I had brought along, not planning to share them tonight, but thankfully prepared nonetheless. I slid the papers across the table, the bold settlement statement heading clearly visible at the top, along with the sale price $740,000. My father's face drained of color as he stared at the document. My mother gasped audibly. Megan snatched the papers, her eyes widening as she registered the sale price. $740,000, she spluttered. That cannot be right. Your house is not worth anywhere near that. Westfield Development is building a mixed-use complex in the area, I explained. They needed my lot as part of their footprint and were willing to pay a premium. Kevin, suddenly interested, leaned over Megan's shoulder to examine the paperwork. That is some serious cash, he remarked, a new calculation visibly taking place behind his eyes. My mother recovered first, her shock, quickly transitioning to something between outrage and calculation. Why would you make such an important decision without consulting the family? This affects all of us. How exactly does my selling my own house affect any of you? I asked, genuinely curious about how she would frame her response. Well, for one thing, it completely undermines our solution for Megan's housing situation, she replied as if this were self-evident. And now you have all this money just sitting around? Megan added accusingly. Money that could help family. I looked at Alice, who gave me a subtle nod of support. Actually, the proceeds are already allocated, I informed them. Part is going toward a new primary residence for Alice and me. Alice and you, my mother repeated. Yes, I confirmed. We are engaged. Alice extended her left hand, displaying the engagement ring we had selected together the previous weekend, modest but elegant like Alice herself. Rather than offering congratulations, my parents exchanged alarmed glances, clearly recalculating how this development affected their access to my resources. Surely you are not spending the entire amount on a house, my father pressed. With that kind of windfall, there would be an opportunity to help family members in need. The rest is being invested, I replied vaguely, not mentioning the specific plans for rental properties with Marcus. Kevin, never one for subtlety, cut to the chase. Look, I have been developing some business concepts that just need initial capital. With your financial background and my creative vision, we could partner on something really groundbreaking. What kind of business concepts? I asked already, knowing there would be no coherent answer. Disruptive tech mainly. Apps that connect consumers with experiences. I have wireframes mocked up and everything. His vague response confirmed my suspicions. My father, sensing the conversation slipping away from their planned outcome, attempted to reassert control. Campbell, I think we need to have a serious discussion about family responsibility. Your sister needs support right now, and you are in a position to provide it. I have supported myself since I was 18 years old. I responded, my voice calm but firm. I worked 3 jobs through college. I saved for years to buy that house. I renovated it with my own hands on evenings and weekends. At no point did anyone in this family offer to help me. That is because you did not need help, my mother interjected. You have always been self-sufficient. And Megan has always been dependent, I countered. Have you ever considered that by constantly rescuing her, you are preventing her from developing the skills she needs to support herself? Megan's face flushed with anger. Just because you have some pathological need to prove yourself does not mean everyone has to struggle unnecessarily. Family is supposed to help family. I agree completely, I replied. Family should help family. But help does not always mean financial bailouts. Sometimes real help means encouraging independence and personal responsibility. My father's expression hardened. So you are refusing to assist your sister after your windfall? That seems remarkably selfish. The accusation might once have wounded me, but that evening, surrounded by their transparent attempts to access my resources, it simply confirmed what I had long suspected, but never fully acknowledged in their eyes, my primary value to the problery. Family had become financial. I am not refusing to assist Megan, I clarified. I am refusing to enable continued dependence. There is a difference. My mother's eyes narrowed. And what about our retirement? Have you considered that supporting Megan has impacted our financial security? Do we not deserve some consideration after all we have done? From across the table, I caught Uncle Jim's eye as he sat at the bar. I had not noticed him earlier, but his slight nod suggested he had been observing our family drama unfold. His presence gave me an unexpected boost of confidence. I have considered everything very carefully, I assured my parents, which is why the money has already been invested. It is not sitting in a checking account waiting to be distributed. Megan pushed back her chair abruptly, the legs screeching against the tile floor. You ruin everything, she hissed, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. You just cannot stand to see me happy. This has nothing to do with your happiness, Megan, I replied steadily. It has everything to do with creating a life based on my own efforts rather than others' resources. Come on, babe, Kevin muttered, suddenly losing interest now that the prospect of easy money had evaporated. Let us get out of here. As Megan stormed out with Kevin trailing behind, my parents sat in stunned silence, their carefully orchestrated plan in shambles. The remaining dinner conversation was strained and brief. My father made one last attempt to suggest that perhaps a loan to help them increase their retirement contributions would be appropriate, but his heart was not in it. When the check arrived, I paid it without discussion, a small gesture that nonetheless symbolized the shifting power dynamic between us. Outside the restaurant, Alice and I stood in the cool evening air processing what had just occurred. Are you okay? She asked, her concern evident. Surprisingly, yes, I replied, realizing it was true. For the first time in my life, I feel completely clear about my relationship with my family. From the restaurant entrance, Uncle Jim emerged and approached us with a wry smile. Quite a performance in there, he commented. Been a long time coming, if you ask me. As we walked to our cars, I felt both the weight of years of family dynamics and the lightness of finally standing firmly in my truth. The road ahead might be complicated, but for the first time, I was navigating it entirely on my own terms. The days following the restaurant confrontation brought an avalanche of communication attempts from my family. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from my mother, ranging from guilt-inducing "I cried all night after dinner" to manipulative "Your father's blood pressure is through the roof because of this stress." Megan alternated between angry accusations, "You have always been jealous of me," and desperate appeals I would help you if the situation was reversed. I responded minimally, acknowledging their messages, without engaging with the emotional manipulation. Alice, with her background in healthcare, provided valuable perspective. What they are doing is trying to pull you back into old patterns, she observed as we sorted through moving boxes in our temporary apartment. We had found a short-term rental while searching for our new home. Every time you refuse to react the way they expect, it disrupts the pattern. Uncle Jim became an unexpected ally during this turbulent period. We met for coffee one morning about a week after the dinner disaster, and he shared insights into my family's dynamics that helped me process decades of confusion. Your father and I grew up with similar expectations from our parents, he explained, stirring his black coffee thoughtfully. The difference is, I broke away early. Robert stayed in the pattern, and now he is recreating it with you and Megan. Did you know they refinanced their house to help support Megan? I asked. Uncle Jim nodded grimly. And it is not the first time. They took out equity when she went to college too, despite having a college fund for her that they had been contributing to for years. What happened to the college fund? They let her use it for a gap year in Europe after high school, called it an educational experience. This information helped complete the puzzle of my family's financial situation. They had been systematically compromising their own security to maintain Megan's lifestyle, and now that resources were dwindling, they had naturally looked to me, the financially stable family member, as the next source of support. 2 weeks after our confrontation, the situation escalated dramatically when my parents appeared unannounced at my workplace. I was in a meeting with a client when my assistant interrupted to inform me that my parents were in the reception area, refusing to leave until they spoke with me. Embarrassed and angry, I excused myself from the meeting and found them sitting stiffly in the visitor chairs, my mother clutching her designer handbag, my father wearing the stern expression he reserved for serious disciplinary conversations. When I was a child. This is completely inappropriate, I told them, in a hushed voice. I am with a client. You have been avoiding our calls, my father replied loud enough that heads turned in the open office area. You leave us no choice but to address this in person. Trevor, emerging from his office at the commotion, approached with a concerned expression. Everything okay here, Campbell? My parents were just leaving. I responded firmly. I will call them this evening. We are not leaving until we discuss the situation with Megan, my mother insisted, her voice rising. She has been evicted from her apartment because she was counting on moving into your house. Trevor, now fully aware of the personal drama unfolding in our professional space, intervened smoothly. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, I am Trevor Blackwell Campbell's supervisor. While I understand family matters can be urgent, this is a place of business. I must insist you continue this discussion outside office hours. My father, unused to having his authority challenged, began to object, but something in Trevor's steady gaze made him reconsider. With obvious reluctance, my parents allowed themselves to be escorted to the elevator, my mother calling over her shoulder, "This is not over, Campbell." When I returned to my desk after completing the client meeting, I found a message from Trevor asking me to stop by his office before the end of the day. Expecting a reprimand for the unprofessional scene, I was surprised when he instead offered support. Family dynamics can be complicated, he said, after I had briefly explained the situation. But I want you to know that your professional conduct has always been exemplary. Do not let this situation affect the good work you are doing here. His understanding reinforced my growing awareness that I had built a professional reputation entirely separate from my family's dysfunction, a reality they seemed unable to grasp. That evening, true to my word, I called my parents. The conversation was predictably difficult. They informed me that Megan had indeed received an eviction notice for non-payment of rent and was temporarily staying in their guest room along with Kevin. Her unemployment benefits have run out, my mother explained, as if this were an unforeseeable natural disaster rather than the predictable consequence of months without job seeking. And the rental market is impossible right now. I am sorry to hear that, I replied, genuinely concerned about Megan's well-being despite our differences. Has she looked into roommate situations, or perhaps Kevin could contribute to their expenses? My father dismissed these suggestions immediately. Kevin is focusing on developing his business concepts right now, and your sister should not have to live with strangers at her age. The conversation circled back to their central premise: I had resources, Megan had needs, and therefore I should provide a solution. When I again refused to offer financial assistance, my father escalated to threats. You need to understand something, Campbell, he said, his voice cold. If you continue to turn your back on this family in our time of need, there will be consequences to that choice. What consequences exactly? I asked. You would no longer be welcome in this family, he stated bluntly. Your mother and I have discussed it, and we are in agreement. Either you help your sister, or you are no longer our son. Though I had been gradually separating myself emotionally from my family for years, The explicit ultimatum still landed like a physical blow. For a moment I was that little boy, again desperately seeking approval that never came. "I need to think about this." I finally responded, my voice steadier than I felt. After hanging up, I sat in the dark of our temporary apartment, waiting for Alice to return from her night shift at the hospital. When she arrived and I shared the ultimatum, she held me as unexpected tears came, not for the threatened loss of my current relationship with my parents, but for the loving relationship I had never had, and now never would. The next day, Uncle Jim called with disturbing news. "Megan has gone on quite a tear on social media," he warned. "You might want to check her profiles." Sure enough, Megan had posted a series of increasingly dramatic accusations across multiple platforms. Without naming me directly but making it obvious to anyone who knew our family, she described being betrayed by my own blood and left homeless because of one person's greed and selfishness. The posts had generated dozens of sympathetic comments and offers of support from her friends. It was a masterful performance of victimhood that completely erased her own choices and responsibilities. Though I was tempted to respond with the full truth, Alice wisely counseled restraint. Engaging publicly would only escalate the situation, she advised. "Anyone who truly knows you understands this is not who you are." She was right, of course. Marcus, who had seen my family dynamics firsthand over the years, offered his own blunt assessment. "They are trying to use social pressure to make you cave. Classic manipulation tactic." During this tumultuous period, Alice and I continued our search for a new home. With the proceeds from my house sale and Alice's savings, we found a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in an established neighborhood with excellent schools, a home where we could envision raising a family someday. We were in the middle of signing the purchase agreement when my phone buzzed with a notification that Megan, Kevin, and my parents were outside our apartment building. Reluctantly, I went downstairs to meet them in the lobby, asking Alice to stay behind and continue with the paperwork. The four of them stood in an accusatory semicircle, my mother's eyes red from crying, my father's expression thunderous, Megan looking simultaneously victimized and vindictive, and Kevin hovering awkwardly in the background. "We know you are buying a new house," my father began, without preamble. "Your mother spoke with Stephanie." I made a mental note to be more careful about who had access to my personal information in the future. "Is that why you are here?" "To discuss my housing choices," I asked, already knowing the answer. "We are here because you have a choice to make," my father continued. "Either you provide financial assistance to your sister, we are thinking 20% of your house proceeds would be fair, or we are done. No more holidays, no contact, nothing." I looked at each of them in turn, seeing the situation with painful clarity. This was not about family love or mutual support. It was a transactional relationship in which my value was measured solely by my willingness to provide resources. "I have already made my choice," I told them quietly. "I choose to break this cycle. I choose not to enable Megan's continued dependence. I choose to invest in a future with someone who values me for who I am, not what I can provide." "So that is it?" my mother asked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You choose money over family?" "No," I corrected her gently. "I choose health over dysfunction. I choose responsibility over enablement. And I choose my future family over patterns that have caused nothing but pain." Megan stepped forward, her face contorted with anger. "You have always been selfish, always thinking you are better than everyone." "I do not think I am better than anyone, Megan. I just made different choices, and now I am living with the consequences of those choices, good and bad. You have the same opportunity." My father placed his hand on my mother's shoulder. "Let us go. He has made his position clear." As they turned to leave, he added, "Do not contact us again. You are no longer welcome in our home." As I watched them walk away, I felt an unexpected lightness, the burden of seeking approval from people incapable of giving it finally lifted from my shoulders. That evening, Uncle Jim called to check on me, having heard about the confrontation from my mother. "For what it is worth," he said, "I think you did the right thing. It might not feel like it now, but standing your ground was the healthiest choice for everyone involved." "Even for Megan?" I asked, still conflicted about my sister, despite everything. "Especially for Megan," he confirmed. She will never learn to stand on her own if someone always catches her when she falls. In the weeks that followed, Alice and I closed on our new home and began making it our own. Marcus and I formalized our business partnership, using a portion of my house sale proceeds to purchase our first investment property, a small multifamily building with good rental potential. Through Uncle Jim, I occasionally received updates about my family. Megan had finally found a job as an administrative assistant at a local business. She and Kevin had moved into a modest apartment within their means. My parents were consulting with a financial advisor about rebuilding their retirement savings. These changes, while small, suggested that perhaps my refusal to be the family safety net had indeed forced some necessary growth. The thought brought bittersweet comfort as Alice and I prepared for our new life together. 6 months passed. Alice and I settled into our new home, transforming it room by room into a space that reflected our shared values and dreams. The master bedroom was painted a serene blue that Alice had chosen. The home office accommodated both her medical journals and my financial analysis work. The spacious kitchen became the heart of our home, where we cooked together on weekends and hosted dinner parties for our growing circle of friends. My business partnership with Marcus exceeded our initial projections. Our first investment property was fully rented with reliable tenants, and we were already researching our next acquisition. We had established a clear ethical framework for our business. We would never displace existing tenants for profit. We would maintain our properties to the highest standards, and we would price our units fairly for the market. Uncle Jim had become something of a surrogate father figure in my life. His straight-talking wisdom and unconditional support filled a void I had felt since childhood. We met regularly for lunch, where he shared stories about my father's youth that helped me understand the generational patterns at play in our family dynamics. "Your grandfather was the same way with your father," he explained during one such lunch. "Nothing Robert did was ever quite good enough while I was the screw-up who got endless chances. I broke away, but Robert internalized it and then repeated it with you and Megan." Understanding these patterns did not excuse my parents' behavior, but it did help me process my experiences with greater compassion and less personal pain. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, an email appeared in my inbox that I had not expected to receive a message from my mother. The subject line read simply, "Reaching out." The email was brief and cautious, expressing hope that I was well, and suggesting that perhaps, after some time and reflection, we might consider some form of reconciliation. The tone was different from any communication I had received from her before, less demanding, more tentative, with none of the guilt-inducing language that had been her hallmark. I shared the email with Alice that evening, uncertain how to respond or whether to respond at all. The wounds were still fresh, the memory of their ultimatum still clear in my mind. "What do you want?" Alice asked simply. "Not what you think you should want, or what would make everyone else happy. What would bring you peace?" It was a profound question that required several days of reflection. I realized that while I had no desire to return to the dysfunctional patterns of the past, I did feel an emptiness at the complete severance of family ties. Perhaps there was a middle path, a relationship with boundaries so clear and firm that they could not be breached. I crafted a careful response to my mother, expressing willingness for a tentative reconnection, but with explicit conditions. No financial discussions, no attempts to make me responsible for Megan's choices, and respect for Alice as my partner, and equal. I made it clear that any violation of these boundaries would result in another complete break. 3 weeks later, we received an invitation to dinner at a neutral location, a restaurant neither family had frequented before. Uncle Jim agreed to attend as well, providing both moral support and a buffer if tensions rose. The dinner was awkward but civil. My parents seemed smaller, somehow less intimidating than the towering figures of authority they had been throughout my life. My father's hair had grayed considerably in the month since I had seen him. My mother's typically perfect appearance showed subtle signs of strain. They shared that Megan was still employed at the same company now with a small promotion. She and Kevin had separated, a development that seemed to have prompted some growth on Megan's part. My parents were working with a financial advisor to rebuild their retirement funds and had put their oversized house on the market, planning to downsize to something more manageable. We have had to make some difficult adjustments, my father acknowledged in perhaps the closest thing to an admission of error I had ever heard from him. I shared appropriate updates about our lives, the new house, my work, Alice's recent certification in a specialized area of nursing. I deliberately kept the conversation at a surface level, testing whether they could respect the boundaries of a normal adult relationship before venturing into deeper waters. By the end of the evening, no dramatic reconciliation had occurred, but a small foundation had been laid for a new type of family relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation or control. Over the following months, we established a careful pattern of occasional family gatherings with clear beginnings and endings. I remained vigilant about boundaries, prepared to step back if old patterns emerged. To my surprise, my parents largely respected the new parameters, perhaps finally recognizing that the alternative was no relationship at all. Megan and I developed a cordial, if distant, relationship. The entitled sister of my youth had been replaced by a more subdued version, who seemed to be slowly learning the connection between choices and consequences. We would never be close, but we could coexist peacefully at family events. The greatest healing, however, came not from these tentative family reconnections, but from the family Alice and I were creating together. Our wedding day, held in the garden of our new home with Marcus, as my best man and Uncle Jim giving a toast that brought tears to my eyes, marked the beginning of a family built on mutual support, respect, and genuine love. To Campbell and Alice, Uncle Jim said, raising his glass, "Who teach us that the strongest foundations are built with our own hands, and that the most powerful act of love is sometimes simply standing in your truth." As I looked around at the gathered guests, friends from work, Alice's large and boisterous family who had welcomed me without reservation, Marcus and his girlfriend, and yes, my parents sitting somewhat uncomfortably but present, nonetheless I felt a profound sense of peace. The house that had become the catalyst for so much conflict had ultimately been just a physical structure. The real achievement had been finding the courage to break generational patterns, to establish healthy boundaries, and to create space for authentic relationships to flourish. That night, after the last guest had departed and Alice and I stood alone in our kitchen, I shared this realization with her. The house they wanted to take became the boundary they could not cross, I reflected, and ultimately the lesson they needed to learn. Alice nodded understanding, as she always did. "And what lesson did you learn?" she asked softly. "That my worth was never determined by their approval," I answered, "and that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to participate in patterns that harm both the giver and receiver." As we moved forward into our life together, I carried this understanding like a compass, guiding me toward healthier relationships and more authentic connections. The pain of being the less favored child would always be part of my story, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it had become the catalyst for building something stronger, healthier, and infinitely more valuable. A life of my own choosing, surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who did not respect your independence? Comment below with your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges. Remember, sometimes the most difficult choices lead to the greatest personal growth. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the strength to stand firm in your own truth, whatever that may be.